We are ready to begin our last session of the day. And this one is my favorite. Not that the others weren't. This is a tribal IRB panel, and all of the 3 tribes featured in this panel are part of the Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health. And I just wanted to have an opportunity to allow each of the members represented on the panel to talk about the establishment of their IRBs, how they really approach the process of reviewing research, and some of the unique scenarios that come up when dealing with review of tribally based research. So welcome everybody. We'll start with having each one of you just take a couple of minutes to tell us where you're from, a little bit about your IRB, when and how long has it been in operation, and any other information you'd like to share.
Start at this
Yep.
end. It's on. Okay. Is it working? No.
Hello. First it would work once I put it right up to my mouth. So my name is Melanie Nadu. I'm from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in Belfort, North Dakota. I have been part of my IRB since the beginning, and that actually occurred in May. We had our first meeting in May of 2015, and so I've been with the board since then. A couple of my fellow board members are also here, and I'd like to acknowledge them as well, Francis and Andrea. They've been with the board since the beginning as well, so we've got a really, really well committed board, and I think that's all you wanted us to start with, right? When we started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what is your role in IRB?
So I did my master's of public health and community health education and health disparities at the University of Minnesota. In December, I just completed my doctorate in social behavioral epidemiology, and so I actually serve as the academic researcher for my board. And everyone on our board is they're all tribal members of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. So.
Hello, I'm Heather Larson. Me and Sarah are both from the Sistawakin Oyate, which is in the northeast, straight up the interstate, the northeast corner of South Dakota, and then our reservation goes into the southeast corner of North Dakota. Did I say that wrong? Did I say South Dakota? Did I mix them? Or no? Okay, the northeast corner of South Dakota and the southeast corner of North Dakota. We barely peek into North Dakota. So our reservation is called the Lake Traverse Reservation. I am the research specialist of our tribal research office, and so basically the IRB administrator. I'm also a voting member of our board. We call our tribal IRB the Local Research Review Board, so if I reference to that, it is our tribal IRB. We began in September of 2014, so still fairly new. Just to talk a little bit about what our board reviews, it's not just human subjects research. We review all research that is proposed to be conducted on our reservation. We do have 2 exemptions, though. We have a tribal historic preservation office, and so if there's a protocol that has anything to do with our culture, we refer it to their board because they were already in existence before us. And the other exemption is our tribal entities, our tribal programs, if they are doing information gathering, so like a survey that fits in with their scope of work for their program, it's not something that we have to review. And the authority we work under is we have a tribal research code that was passed in July of 2015, so after our board was established. That was a lengthy process. And so that is our tribal law and everything research related. Not all of our board members are tribal members. The majority are. The ones who aren't have specific ties to our communities. So either they're married to a tribal member, or they have worked in our community for a long period of time, I guess. And they're not elected or nominated, they're recruited by myself, and I ask for input from our current board members when I'm seeking to fill a position.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Dakota, and I'm a voting member of the Local Research Review Board, and have been since it started. I'm also the health coordinator for the tribe, and have been for 43 years. And prior to having a local research review board, we did have research before then, and how it worked, because the Great Plains IHS IRB required that there be tribal approval and then also IHS approval in order for the research to go forward. So our tribal health board reviewed the proposed research, and that was out without the benefit of these regulations that we've been talking about, or any kind of a checklist or any formal preparation. And so, and I staffed the health board meetings for that purpose. So it's been real interesting for me to be part of the local research review board and learn about the criteria and how to objectively review the protocols, and to provide more protection for the tribal members and assist the researchers.
What is your tribe, or the name of your?
Sisseton, Wahpeton, Oyate. So I'm together with Heather.
Hello, I'm Katie Blayman from Oglala Sioux Tribe, and I'm the coordinator for the Oglala Sioux Tribe Research Review Board. I'm also the data research assistant for CRCA. Our board was developed back in September of 2007. And that was an ordinance from our tribal council. I'm not too too familiar with all of it. What I do know. A lot of my support comes from the board members themselves. They give me a lot of direction, along with the CRCA staff. And I actually have one of the board members here with me. This is Deb Tobacco. She was seated on the board a couple of years ago, if I'm right. So we've been in existence before CRCA came about, but they helped us to develop a lot of our processes and things like that.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Betty Washington. Debbie Tobacco imachi apia na Tashina Peju Tawi Lako imachi apia na Pine Ridge Indian Reservation Ekta El Wawashi na T. My name is Deb Tobacco, and I'm from the Oglala Lakota Nation, and I began serving on the OHRP board in December of 2016.
All right. Okay, so some things came up earlier in the sessions, and I thought it'd be good if we address some of those topics. So you mentioned the tribal ordinance, you mentioned the tribal law. Would somebody like to talk through the process for how the IRBs were established? So the passage of the research code, and then development of policies. Anybody?
As Katie mentioned, the OHRP was established by the Oglala Sioux Tribal Council because for many years research was being conducted without any knowledge and active participation with the tribal council leadership. And so the OHRP was established to help ensure that the OST regulations along with federal regulations were being adhered to by researchers.
Oh, the tribal law.
Okay. Within that ordinance, they also established a tribal research code. So we don't call it an actual law, but it's a research code in regards to the ordinance. So that's what we adhere to, and that's how we conduct our business, is in reference to that.
So just to give a little timeline of how our office progressed, that might make a little bit more sense. So as Sarah mentioned, our previous to when we had a research office, our protocols were reviewed by the Human Services Board and or the Tribal Council themselves. And so in October of 2013, Tribal Council made a motion to establish an IRB. And then in June of 2014, so a lot later that year, there was a resolution by Tribal Council establishing this partnership with CRCAIH. So in the meantime, somebody had applied for our grant and tried to find funding to get our office going. And then, as I mentioned before, September of 2014 is when our board was established after we received the CRCAIH grant. And the next thing was, after the board was established, the staff began working on writing a research code. And so trying to figure out what should be in that tribal law, following regulations and what we want to specifically have in there about owning the rights to the data and expressing our own sovereignty and that type of thing. So it was a really long process. It took until July of 2015, so way more than a year later, for it to actually be passed. It had to go, our tribe is divided by 7 districts. There was, I think, 16 versions of the research code until it was the final passed version. And they had to present that to the districts, so to the membership, to the people, get their approval. It went to a judicial committee, it went to our legal team at the tribe, and back to the tribal council at the very end. So it was a long process and a long road to get there, but once it was a huge accomplishment once it happened.
I'll just echo exactly what you said. It was a very long process. It took these efforts, started with the resolution with the tribes in March of 2013, and in our community there's an entity called the Tribal Nations Research Group, which actually helped form the Turtle Mountain Band at Chippewa Indians Research Review Board and helped to oversee that process. I work at North Dakota State University currently, and I'm the operational director / assistant faculty in practice for the American Indian Public Health Resource Center. And we're one of, as a center, we're one of many partner organizations that have had input into the process of developing the board, and just tried to assist and provide technical assistance in any way that we could. But there were many entities and many individuals that contributed to the formation of this board. One of the things that I think is important to mention is, just from my perspective, looking at when I first when the board first started, and being one of the first members of the board, is just really seeing the formation has been really exciting, and seeing the the Protection Act that was developed and formed was based not only on research guiding principles that you see with any research review board across the nation, but with tribal communities, there's other community considerations that come into play and guiding principles that are cultural in nature that guide the process and the decision-making process that you wouldn't see on other, that you wouldn't typically see. I don't want to say that you wouldn't see, because I think every community has community considerations, but I think that it can be unique in nature working on a tribal research review board. And I would put myself on a limb to say I'm sure that the guiding principles vary, from a cultural standpoint and a tribal standpoint, because tribal diversity, even though we represent the smallest population on this continent, we represent the hugest diversity with the number of tribes and varying culture and language considerations that go into our research review boards. So rather than going through the timeline, because you did a very good job, it was similar in nature. It took a long process, and like I said, we didn't review or have our first official meeting until March of 15. So it took a while to get through all those processes.
Hello. So I think the common theme that I identified with all the three is, the processes were different based on each tribe, but there was an effort to get community-wide input in the development of the research code. So in some ways, the research code reflects the voice of the community, which I think is very important for us to keep in mind. And you also talked about guiding principles, and that are different culturally. So can you talk about some of the unique considerations that you look into when you're looking at research protocols? We've talked about individual protections, but maybe talk about community protections or other things that you look out for.
So just to kind of share with you, so for the Turtle Mountain Band Chippewa Indians Research Protection Act, there were a multitude of principles that were considered in the formation of that act. One of them being the 7 teachings of the tribe, which are, based on truth and, let's see, then other, well, I'll go over this first, then I'll touch on that. We also considered principles of fully informed consent after full disclosure of consultation, principles of immediate risks and benefits to the tribe from a tribal perspective, principles of confidentiality, principles of respect, principles of communication, empowerment, communication, equity, mutual respect, prior rights, self-determination, and traditional guardianship. So there was, with all of these considerations, when we, I guess one thing that I just want to kind of back up and state is that we review, as a research review board for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, and I'm sure this varies with every community as well, we review everything that comes into the community. So, if it's research or not. So we review it and it's sent to us, and I think that makes our board unique. But it's nice because we know what's going on in the community, and we can, I think sometimes with individuals submitting, when you're submitting research requests for approval, that there's terminology and definitions that aren't universal across disciplines. So every discipline has their own language and stuff. So it's good that we do review everything that comes into the tribe, because sometimes something might not be considered, that another entity wouldn't consider research. It is actually considered research. So that's been good. I think the other thing that I'll just make a little brief comment on is did I lose my train of thought here? Oh, the community considerations. So when we're reviewing protocols, community considerations might be different than individual considerations, or considerations that would come up would, from a community perspective, actually will differ. And so the 7 teachings that we use to inform our research protocols would be truth, honesty, respect, love, bravery, humility, and to know all this is to know truth. So yeah, I think I'll just close with that.
So again, to list some of the things that make our review unique, and not to repeat anything that she said. As the administrator, I will probably have a different answer than Sarah will, which is also good. But one of the things I often talk to the researchers about is asking them how they will benefit from conducting the research. And it a lot of times will throw them off because they say, oh no, I'm not going to benefit. We're here to help, or we want to do this for, the field will benefit, or whatever it is. And having them recognize that there is a way that they are going to benefit from it. We always ask the question, why SWO, why the Sistemoktun Oyate, why Dakota people, Sioux, whatever you want to reference it as, why in the Midwest, why have you picked our tribe to do this project? And if there's other tribes involved in the project, kind of looking at that correlation too is another thing. Another really big one that I will repeat from her is that we always consider the overarching theme is, how will this benefit our tribe? And is it necessary? One other thing that we look at is if the certain population is being over-researched in our communities. So one example that kind of comes up a lot is our children in the school systems. And although it may be different curriculums that are being tested or whatever it may be, we look at how many times they're being surveyed in a year, or how many different things are going on. Another population is our pregnant mothers, and they kind of get surveyed to death. And is it that valuable? Is it one of our priorities and something that we feel would be really beneficial to our community? And then the last thing I'll mention is, always looking to see if there's a culturally appropriate approach that the researcher is using. And a lot of times that's where our board comes in with input, because those researchers may not know that type of information, and it varies from tribe to tribe and from community to community, and so it's kind of on a case-by-case basis.
Just to add to what Heather has said, cultural competence, I think, is something that we look at. Heather touched on cultural relevance, but cultural competence is something else. And even though people might think they understand tribal sovereignty, they probably, what we find a lot of times is that they do not. They don't really understand that there is a totally different infrastructure in Indian country compared to what they might be used to, and they don't know how to navigate those internal structures. So they think they understand, but when it comes to actually implementing the protocol, they do not.
How does the board assist or inform the investigator to help navigate through that? Or does the board? I mean, it should be phrased.
Well, that's a good question
Because sometimes
Turn off your mic?
it says it's on. Okay, I don't know what happened. That's a good question because sometimes when people come in, so the question is what's unique about tribal IRBs. So we're not sure sometimes how it works elsewhere, but a lot of times their expectation is that we're going to set them up with who's who in the community and get if they're planning on doing research with students in a school, or they're planning on doing research with the Indian Health Service, they have the expectation that the local research review board or the research specialist is supposed to organize all of that for them, and that isn't our role. And what we've found was with a couple of pretty uncomfortable situations is we have had a couple of studies have to stop, more than one, because they didn't have that understanding or everything lined up with other entities that they needed to in order to move forward. In line with that, another thing is that we think that they should have, that part of their experience in working with tribes is that they should try to do some research and navigate the community on their own a little and understand who's who and what's what before they approach the local research review.
I just wanted to add for being an Oglala Lakota IRB member, add to what my relatives have already said in regards to the unique, what was that question? The unique
the circumstances around review of research and
Okay. So the purpose of the board is to protect the rights of the people, the environment, the land, its resources, and our sovereignty. So I think it's just important to for everyone to be aware that whenever we talk about the land, its resources, the environment, and our sovereignty, we look at it from a perspective of being in relation to everything all around us that exists. So our job as IRB member in protecting those rights for all of those entities is important. And so when research that comes in front of us that has to do with the land, resources, and environment especially, we make sure that the researchers are aware of our perspective of being relatives to all of that, because as the Oglala Lakota member, we live by the concept of Mitakuye Oyasi and Wotakuye, which means that we're in relationship to all that exists, and that's how we recognize everything, that everything has a spirit, and so therefore everything has a right. And so it's important that we are able to really review what's put in front of us to make sure that not only are they in line with federal and tribal policy, but that everything that is being brought to us is going to benefit us in that nature as well as the researcher.
Okay. All right, I'm going to shift the gear a little bit and ask you about what impact do you think creation of the research review boards has had for research in general in your community, and anything in particular as well?
I I think that the impact in regards to the community is great, but I think that we should also be aware that although we're a federally recognized tribe, our tribal council leadership is put into place, into position by electoral vote. And we all know that with those types of elections and putting people into leadership, it's usually by popular vote. So our voting turnout is often really low. And so I would consider that not a true voice of the people. However, it is what we have to operate with. It's what we have to deal with in regards to research and things that, as IRB, I should say, that's what we have to deal with, and we have to trust that our leadership is working to attain the voice of the people when issues come up onto their agenda.
I'll just add that the change. I wonder why this is cutting out.
You're the only one does it too.
I think the local research review board, or having an IRB, is a major milestone but over a continuum. So we're thinking research. So sort of the discussion is that maybe research started with the IRB, but from my perspective, it was going on longer than that. So the change, when you think about community readiness and community change, I don't know how many of you remember about 25 years ago, the NARF, the Native American Rights Fund, put out a model research code. And I remember taking that to our judicial committee. Heather mentioned judicial committee and having to go work with that to get our ordinance in place. It went nowhere. And that was the first attempt. We also had several attempts taking that model research code and trying to establish it through the years. So that really is the fact that over the last 3 or 4 years, we now not only have a research code and a local research review board, it means that from now on, things are going to be moving a lot more fast and efficiently than they have in the past. That's what I see. A lot more structure and infrastructure in place.
It's hard to
pick one impact. Is this working?
Can you hear me? Oh. Really like a cell phone. Can you hear me?
It's working.
Hello? Okay, I'm going to try not to move. So, I think of, is it still working? Oh, sorry. Now I can't even tell the difference. I think one of the biggest impacts was beginning to start to change the viewpoint of our community members. And so in the beginning, when I mentioned the long process of our research code and our staff going out to the 7 districts numerous times to the 7 districts, right away with each initial visit, the answer was no. No to research. We don't want that. We've done that. Bad things have happened, or we didn't get. Jeez. And I think that now people are understanding the importance of research oversight and expressing our sovereignty to owning rights to the data. And I think people overall are understanding the importance of research and that we have been conducting research for a long time and how much that is helping our community. We've been doing it ourselves and allowing these outside partnerships in as well. That I think that that view is starting to open up more. Instead of saying no to anything external, it just seems like there's a lot of shifts happening. So I would think that's the biggest impact that I've noticed.
Like humming or something. Let's see. There's well, I kind of want to back up just a little bit and talk about the being on the board. One of the things that I've noticed in your comment over there is what brought it to mind is just making sure that what's being proposed is feasible. What we'll have proposals that we review, and there's not letters of support or letters of commitment or buy-in, and it doesn't take that much work to get that. We had a proposal, for mental health, some aspect of mental health, and it's like, okay, well, we know that in our community that we're over capacity. The providers are so busy that they're overworked. We don't have enough mental health care providers in our community to meet the need. So how are you going to bring in the study, and how are they going to accommodate what you need? And it might be a great idea. It might be needed, but is it feasible, and are you going to have that community support and buy-in from the individuals in the community that are going to help make your project a success? So just because it's needed, just because it's a great idea, doesn't mean that it should be done in a tribal community, because you always got to think about whether or not it's going to be feasible. And getting that community buy-in and getting those demonstrating community support goes a long way when you actually start doing your project and carrying it out. Unfortunately, running a center that oversees a multitude of grants, I understand that the grant process isn't kind to us when it comes to getting letters and doing all these things. And then also the grant process is not kind when it comes to the translation of results. Both of these things are very important from a community perspective. I'm not sure if that'll ever change, but that's one of the challenges as researchers that we face when trying to do this work. There has been a lot of good research that has happened in tribal communities, and of course I think it's like with anything, when you hear about when something bad happens, it blows up across the media, right? But when you have all these positive things, it doesn't really hit the radar as high. So I think it's important yes, we need to acknowledge, the negative things that have happened in the past, but also acknowledging the good things that have happened as well. The other thing is, as far as impacts, we've had a lot of impacts in our community. And from my perspective, of course, I'm biased, right? But last week, I had the honor of being invited to present my dissertation research for our first Data Matters conference in the Turtle Mountains. First tribal conference. It was a huge success. It was so fun to participate in that conference. And one of the things that I really thought was interesting was that we even had a PhD individual that writing her dissertation. She's worked with it's Beyond Buckskin. I don't know how many people are familiar with that or have bought products from that, but we had that a fashion show with our youth, and it just being a tribal member and seeing our youth up there walking, demonstrating these tribal products from Native artists across the nation just brought me so much pride, and it was you just had to be there. It was just so beautiful. We're also building a research repository and a research library, and that researchers and community members and what have you will have access to that could find use for this repository. I think this is really important because not only does it acknowledge all the great work that's been done, things that didn't go so well, you can learn from it. Things don't always go as we find, but I think if we take the time to reflect on that experience and actually use that to drive us moving forward to inform future efforts, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. And then making sure that we're not recreating the wheel, so we have those efforts to move our research agendas forward, and then also having a repository helps us to form our research agendas because we know what hasn't been looked at, what has been looked at, where are the gaps at. And so, this is a great opportunity as far as impact to provide cultural support for our artists, for individuals that are working on that front, raising awareness of the things that are going on. And I think that, today's technology, just being able to, I call into the meeting every month. I'm in Fargo. So just having that technology, that capacity to be able to call into meetings, to be able to meet via web, you can do so much. And so just because you don't have your tribal members living in or on your tribal lands doesn't mean that they can't be a part and meaningfully contribute to the formation of these kind of processes. And yeah, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few minutes, so I'll keep it open for audience for any questions.
If I'm going to jinx this, Mike. I have a couple of questions that are for everybody, and then one specifically for Heather, I think. Do you advertise or post your research protocols and their findings so that your community is aware of what's going on? Is that something that you would do? That's one question. And then do you provide an orientation for researchers? Like if they come and approach you like, okay, these are some things that we want you to know, expectations that we have of you and what you can expect of us, and maybe incorporating your lessons learned aspect in there too. And then Heather, what answer did you get when you asked researchers, why did you pick our tribe?
So for the first question about whether we advertise the research projects and their findings, we do advertise what our current projects are and then the recently completed projects. I don't publicly put the findings out there. That's something that we are not comfortable doing. It depends. It's a case-by-case basis. It's different if it's a tribal employee looking to use that information to help their tribal entity or their program, whether from that being to a tribal elder that's interested in this project and seeing what happened. Like it just really varies. But we do have a website, and every month they're updating what our current projects are as we approve them. And then in regards to the orientation for board members, that is something...
No, it's for the researchers.
For researchers, sorry.
When researchers come and, knock on your door.
I don't have a formal orientation. Once again, it's case by case. It's really tricky. At our tribe anyway, most of the researchers are external. They're from the outside, and they are typically pretty far away. And so a lot of it is through Skype or phone calls. A lot of times I don't ever get to really meet the people face to face until they come on site to conduct their research. So it's a lot of back and forth in writing and then talking on the phone. And sometimes it's hours with just one person trying to walk them through everything that I think our board is going to come at them with. But I don't have a formal orientation. One thing that we've been trying to work on is getting a cultural sensitivity piece made so that it's something that we can give our researchers and they can start to understand bits and pieces of general knowledge of our culture and traditions. And another thing is we have made a history piece on our tribe. There was one before that went up into the 1970s. And so kind of building off of that one from the 70s up until now, we had a document drafted up. And so that's available for purchase, like $7. We need funding. But for the researchers who are interested in doing their homework, which it should be every researcher, no matter how long you've worked with natives, or even if you are native but you're not Dakota. I mean, there's a lot of homework that should be done on their end. However, I am the only staff in this office, and so I do not have time to have an orientation and walk these. I mean, I give them the bare minimum and then hope that they can navigate our tribal community. I help as much as I can, but it's very difficult. I wear a lot of hats. And the last question was specific.
Well, you asked the question, why have you come to this tribe and to do your research? And what did they answer?
A lot of times, one of the required documents is their CV or their resume. And so a lot of times I don't have to ask that because I can see where their tie is to the community. And there has been previous research on a reservation, or they're from a local university in the state. And sometimes one answer recently was that they were seeking out tribes that had an IRB, because they knew there would be like a quicker process, and I really don't agree that it's quicker, but yeah, that was one answer. It depends on the project. One example is right now, I'm talking with a researcher who's doing a project on BAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, and our tribe is a BAWA tribe, and so that's how they picked us. There's, I think, maybe 5 or something in the country, so there are good answers on why they picked. Sometimes the researcher is from South Dakota, or grew up in a small town by Sistan, and knows people in our community. It just really varies, but they're always typically good answers.
Sorry, if anyone else wants to answer those questions too.
Yeah, just to reflect on what you said about the process, from a student perspective for myself, my classmates working on their dissertation would have to go through the University of Minnesota Institutional Review Board, and they're well on their way to doing their project, right? Well, for myself, I had to get approval from the University of Minnesota Institutional Review Board. Then, since I was working with clinical data, Indian Health Service data, I had to go through the Aberdeen Area Institutional Review Board, and then they make a determination if they also want national approval from the National Indian Health Service Institutional Review Board or not. They didn't require that of me, which was nice. And then you have to get a resolution passed with the tribe itself, and then you have to get a letter of accommodation from the CEO of the Indian Health Service, and then you have to get approval from the Tribal Research Review Board. So I would say the process is much longer, but being that I was well connected in the community, it was feasible. As far as orientation for researchers, on our particular Tribal Nations Research Group has created a website that has a wealth of information, and that not only resources that are available, they also have a list of the current projects that are happening in Turtle Mountain, and the tribe itself also has a lot of cultural information, the tribal website, as far as like who we are, what we do, and resources available. So. But I think that, I don't know if we'll ever get to where we can actually have a formal orientation. I think it would be great if we could offer that as an option, but being that everyone's, well, I can only speak at, from my perspective with our current board, but being our board is, volunteer and, dispersed, and it can be challenging to try to do that. But if we could create something that would be available, I think that would be great. Another thing is just having the conference itself was really provided a nice platform for sharing that we just had last week, and everyone in the community was really excited about that, and raised awareness about, there's a lot of tribal members who are doing research in our communities now, and people that were 20 years ago that were part part of research community at that time, didn't see that at that time, and we're talking about how we needed our own researchers to be doing research in our communities, and now we're starting to see our own people doing a lot of research. So it's exciting times in tribal communities, and to have a board that's all from the community and from a diversity of fields is pretty exciting as well. I think that's it.
Did you want to add to that? Yeah. Go ahead.
For Owasso tribe, usually the researcher contacts me, and we are one of the tribes that does everything online. It's an online submission. In the initial application, there's a checklist that the researcher will go through before they submit. But other than that, it's a lot of emails and phone calls, trying to just kind of get a feeling of what they're going to be put through coming in front of our board. We don't have an orientation. We don't have a website. We are working on that, but on our online submission site, everything is on there, from our policies and procedures to all the forms that are used to submit to our board, from the beginning to the end. We also have a webinar that is available on there on how to submit. And I am currently doing instructions, that way you can just identify what exactly you're trying to do.
So as Katie mentioned, when everything is submitted, website, Axio Mentor, then when she puts out our agenda, the agenda for the IRB board, then we're able to get on there and review all the researchers' information, everything that they submit that should be aligned to the protocol of submission. And we're usually able to review that like a week before our meetings. And if we have any questions, then there's a nice little, what do you call those? Context on there that we can put our questions on there. So our meetings usually really run efficient. So thanks to the technology. So it's really nice to have that. And then if we have questions for the researchers, when the time comes, then they're able to answer those. If we need more documentation to justify the research, then we just request that. Katie will usually get back to them by email or phone call. So it's really nice to have that. So, okay. And our meetings are held once a month on the third Saturday every month, and they're open. So anybody can come and sit in to review, observe. We also encourage community to attend, so that if there's any questions, then we usually allow time for that. And that not only helps us as IRB members, but it also helps the researchers to really fine-tune their questionnaire surveys, their justifications. So I think that's what's another thing that's really great about the community-based research projects that are presented to us, because they're really able to get information from the community itself and not just from the IRB members.
Something I think that hasn't been talked about yet is partnerships. We've been talking mostly about outside researchers who are interested in coming to our community and doing research. But we also have a fair amount of partnerships that have developed, particularly with people in Heather mentioned local universities and other entities. So one of the challenges that we have as tribes is when we want to use our public health authority to do some type of research, we don't necessarily have the background in doing analysis, statistical analysis, and understanding the and to be able to compete on a research grant, you have to have a principal investigator that has credentials. So a tip, I think, in working with tribes is to work together with the tribal entities over the long haul, and we've done that with. We've had a collaborative relationship with Stanford Research for, it's probably been at least a dozen years. It was prior to CRCAIH. And actually went out and looked for grants, partnered together to go after them. Something that is kind of newer for me, because I'm learning every day. Everything is not getting any easier. It's getting harder, more complicated. So within the last month, I have come to understand that when the tribe says that in order to contract with an outside entity, so we go out, we get a grant, maybe the tribe has the grant, and we're going to subcontract with a researcher to be the principal investigator on it, that researcher is going to have to understand that the governing law is the tribe. They're going to have to consent to the jurisdiction of the tribe and to the governing law, so that if there's ever a dispute, they would come to tribal court, and that would be where the jurisdiction is. And maybe in the past there was compromise language, but that is no longer the case. And that's an important thing to understand and work on together and develop those relationships over time. So that when there is a grant or an opportunity, we can work on it together to be successful in bringing the resources into our community.
Hi, I was just wondering, with the revision of the new common rule, what your opinion is on central IRBs, when it could involve people of your tribe, but could also include people in different communities, if you guys have been talking about that at all.
I have that. Yeah, in Turtle Mountain, we form partnerships with, like you said, universities. And the most recent partnership is with Stanford University, with Dr. Teresa LaFramboise. And she had to go, I contacted her because I had this question. Okay. I contacted her because I had a question. So we planned a research study, and we had to go through the school board. Then she had to go through Stanford IRB. Then we had to go to the tribal IRB. By the way, I can't comment on any of her stuff because I'm part of it. But in those entities, we formed a partnership, and the tribe owns the data. I want to use this. Anyway, the tribe owns the data. So she had to get permission from the IRB to use that data in her research. And as part of the agreement, the data that she collected has to be presented to the school board and the community. And then the other part of it is we are doing a follow-up a year later. It's in how does school engagement help students to get through school? So we're doing another one in about 3 weeks, a follow-up. And so she has to do a comparative study, and in that comparative study, and it's a partnership because we don't have the data crunching machinery that they do. So I give her the data, and she crunches all the information, and then they present to our school and to our community and to the tribal council. So that's the partnership. But we benefit because we can use that data to address attendance issues, failing grades issues, and to wondering if students that don't have that engagement, are they different than the ones that have students that are in basketball, in clubs? They come into schools where they're seated. They have engagement with our future report, different things. So I'm kind of excited for this to go. But that's a partnership that you were talking about. Somebody said that they didn't have enough machinery to crunch numbers. Well, that's why Stanford is able to help us. I got teacher's voice.
Thank you. In regards to the single IRB rule, I just wanted to add that as tribal nations, we're considered to be sovereign, and we have to exercise that right, meaning that we have a right to make protocols and laws in regards to research that's going to be conducted on our land, the environment surrounding our land, our people, and everything that exists there. So I think it's important to be aware and know that when it comes to the gray areas of that, we should be able to rely on the tribe's sovereignty and their policy making and laws in regards to research.
Yeah, that was my question. Is like, I work in North Minneapolis, and we're having a hard time as a community IRB going through Essential that's not familiar with, a low-income neighborhood, and we aren't necessarily going to be okay with the informed consent that they approve. And so I was just wondering if individually you had already talked about that within your communities and how you were going to combat that, if you were going to make a policy on that, that no matter if, the ruling says that, they're still going to have to come through you. And yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of pushback right now with that as a community IRB. So that was my question. So
yeah, I think that with our IRB2, that in addressing those issues, we've looked at, or we are looking at modifying some of our protocols, and then we work also closely with the tribal council. So giving them reports to what needs to be addressed and so forth. We're there to give them information on what's going on and what issues need to be addressed in regards to modifying the research code, developing new laws that they mentioned before in the presentations. That it's up to the tribes to be aware of things like that so that they can make changes as they go if they need to.
Just to add to what she had said, so our tribe was one of the tribes that did respond to the proposed before the deadline. I can't even remember when that was. Maybe not last fall, but maybe the one before. Yeah, it's too many deadlines. So our tribal council there was 2 different resolutions. Both were addressing the proposed changes, and so I was really glad we found out pretty late in the game that this was going to happen and that there was only so much room for comment. I mean, we barely had a month. And so to get our tribe to act that fast, we were lucky. And luckily that was my supervisor, Dr. Sherry Johnson, was able to just keep putting her foot in the door until we got something. So I'm really glad our tribe was represented in that. But yeah, that is a big concern. We have talked about revisiting our research codes as well, and maybe having a little more clarification, because in our codes, that goes against our code. And ultimately, our tribal law is what we follow and what we will always follow. And so and that's where all the opposition came from. I mean, it makes it difficult because if you're saying you can have a single IRB and then we just don't have a say, that goes directly against what we follow. And so maybe defining it a little bit more in code to say that that is not going to apply on our reservation or something like that. So yeah, those conversations have been happening. That's like the biggest thing on our radar that we're worried about when it comes to the changes. Yeah, definitely. Good question. Thank you.
All right, I think it's after 4 o'clock, and I know Misty wanted to take a few minutes to wrap up.
Hey, first of all, thank you so much to the panel. That was fantastic.